All right. Okay. So just as we or I place in the group, we're just kind of want to discuss um, the ideas behind the projects we are about or we've been given to do. Right. So why do we need to do some projects like this? Or is it even important? Like, what are the advantages of doing this project, and why do we even have to worry about doing it? Okay, so um, you see, uh, when we started this program, we usually talked about, let's say, flow charts and pseudocodes and things of that sort. Right. So just to begin, what I'm talking about is let's say web infrastructure design, right? But then I'll be borrowing concepts from different areas to probably maybe make it a little bit easier to understand, right? So for now, let's put this web infrastructure thing all aside, and then let's think about a usual problem that we may have and how we may work through to solve it. Right. So let's say that we have a problem where we are supposed to, let's say, add two numbers and display the result. Right. So for such a program, what we can say is we can say that for the first step, okay, for the first step, we can say take input. That'll probably be our first step, right? Take input from the user. Then secondly, we can see that add the two numbers and then print a result, right? But this one too, we can even go ahead and then like even say even much more things, right? We could say that here instead of taking the input alone, we can say that the first number to the second number and store it as let's say 1, and this I will say and store it in X. Let me fix this one. Store it in X. I hate this. Okay, so now we can see that take the first number and store it in X, then take the second number and store it in Y, right? So now we can then say something like add the two numbers. Oops. So add the two numbers and store it in Z, right? So print the result, right? So print the result, which is going to be print the result in Z, right? So you see here, what we are just doing is that we are putting out how we are going to build out the solution in code, right? And we also know that we have a particular way of also doing this same thing, where we go about to draw a flow chart. So here we can see that for the starting, we have this kind of oval shape where we use to start, and then from that oval shape, we take an input from the user, which looks like this. That's the first input. Then second input, we also take another input, which is also going to be a number. Then we compute the results like that. And then for the final thing, we print out the results, like something like that. Right. So this is giving us a flow of how the program is supposed to go. Right. So when we're speaking about the infrastructure design, we are basically talking about how does information flow from one side to the other. Right. So how does this information that we are looking at transfer from one other place? So that is essentially what we are trying to cover when we are about to do this infrastructure designing thing. Okay, so it's similar to how we already maybe have steps to write a program. Right. So for this example here, we just use an example of a program where we are taking in two numbers and then returning or printing the output. Right. So the pseudocode can be more or less depending on how you want to take go about that. Okay. So we can see that from this here, we are able to draw this kind of flow chart where we are able to see that, well, from here I go to this side and I'll go from here and I go there. Right. So this is like an example of how things go about. Okay. Also, let's get rid of this one. And also this. All right. So here you see the other thing that we are trying to do is to think of it in the sense of infrastructure, right? And when we talk about infrastructure, we are talking about the hardwares, the devices that make things connected. Okay. So here, what I'll do is that I would bring up a particular network that we can look at, right? For now, you don't worry so much if you don't understand the exact details of it. That's not the real purpose for this particular one here, right? The idea here is to just to show an example of how things usually work. Okay, so let's see here, right? You can see that here I have a very simple design, which is basically one PC or like two PCs. Okay, and these two guys have to connect and then speak to each other. Okay, so here, if we are to design this, we have to think about the fact that, well, this device here has to be able to connect and talk to this guy. So there has to be a mechanism in which they would use to connect to each other and then talk on the network. Okay, so a very simple example that we can look at is how we transfer data from our phones or from our laptops all the way to the internet and back. Okay, so we hold on to this particular example for now, but basically you can see an example of how devices are being connected. Right? Usually you don't worry about these ones, but then there's a lot more that goes into this. Okay, so for example, another example, we can look at another thing, which, oops, I would have to fix something over here. That's not to worry. There's this other example here, which is more simpler, right? So this is more of like if I need to communicate with two PCs, right? Let's say if you want to do something with just two machines, there's a way in which you'd have to go through and then work with that. Okay, so here we just have two PCs that are sort of connected to each other. Okay, so if this was more complex, then we would have to think through about how each of these devices would have to communicate with the other person, right? But for here, focus is not really about the full details. It's about just finding out, okay, well, how is this supposed to work, and how does this person relate to the other person? Okay, so for example, let's say that we just search the internet for a distributed web infrastructure, let's say an image, right? Just so that we would see an example of what we are trying to do. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and then just get an image. Okay, so you can see, for example, that let's click on this one here, right? So for now, again, don't really worry about the specific examples of this really just yet. Right? I think that is happening here is that we have a device, a client, right, that is trying to access the internet, right? So they are going from their PC, which is us, from their PC, goes through the internet, and then whatever thing this is, don't worry about that yet, right? We go all over to the internet, and usually there's all that we see. We have our PC, then we go to the internet, and we expect that we get a result, right? So that is what we usually expect, or how we usually work with our PCs and our everything, right? So you see, there are a lot of things that really go into just typing anything into your browser or anything at all that you do on the internet. A lot of things are really going on. So here, all that is really happening is that we are sort of going through a lot of devices to get to where we want to get and receive what we want back. So something like this is what we are trying to basically build, right, in the project. Okay, so the ability to be able to figure out what each device is and what they do is what is important for this project. And then from there, we'll be able to also try to work out something small from what we are about to learn, right? So you can see multiple examples of what we like different types of infrastructures. Okay, so for now, this looks as an example of what we are trying to do, which is usually like very similar to what we are trying to do. Okay, so now, as I was saying, it is really about knowing what devices do, what kind of image really puts everything together. Okay, so one of the things that we really have to talk about is, okay, well, we talked about the fact that this is the idea or the ability to bring to life our like our goal, right? Just like we would use a pseudocode and a flowchart to make known our intent on what we are planning to code. This also is going to give us an overview of how our devices are connected to each other, how they communicate, and how things move about in the network. Okay, so that is for that part. The next thing that we are going to talk about are the specifics, which comes to the devices and what they do. Okay, so I'll be using this example over here for a moment. So let me get that and paste that. Allow. Okay, so here we have some few devices. Okay, so we have a client, which is just like a PC, like a laptop. Okay, and then we have this guy over here, which is looking like this. Usually, this image is used to show what is called a load balancer, right? And we talk about what a load balancer is very soon. There's the device as well, right? So there are these devices that are used, and the icons that they have also determine the exact thing that they are doing. Okay, so now coming back to the client, that is us, right? The thing that we need to work with, right? Like our PC, our phones, the device that we use to access the information that we need online, we can say that is our client, right? Then once we go all the way to the internet, right? For now, don't worry about this yet, right? When you go over to the internet, we have a device called a server, right? So we probably have heard about servers at this point, where they are the devices that are hosting some information that we can work with, like a web server, an application server, a database server, a lot of servers that we have on the internet, or a lot of servers that we have that are doing a lot of things. Okay, so the idea here is that we have someone who is asking for something and another who is uh, giving the data that we are looking for. Okay, so that is a job of the client and then the server. So we usually call this a client server architecture, or like a client server model, right? So we have a client, a user who asks for information, and then someone else who is called the server returns the information, right? So coming back to this guy over here, the load balancer. Don't worry about the active passive just yet. So this guy, what he does is that he's able to look at the information that is coming into the network and then decide that, well, okay, this person should take this load, another person should take this load. Meaning that, let's say that if we have 50 connections coming into our server, you can see that, for example, here we have 2 servers at this point. So this guy over here can say that, okay, well, this device over here can take 70% of the load, and this guy can take the 30%. That is, let's say, based on what specifications or based on the strength of the service, right? Or again, we can also say that, well, I'll take the first one, you take the second one, I'll take the fourth, you take the I'll take the third, you take the fourth, like in that kind of round fashion, right? And for this, it even has a name called round robin, right? So these devices are just making sure that everything is working as we expect them to be working. Okay, so you can see that we have the client, the load balancer, which is in charge of distributing the traffic or the load to the devices that need to work with them. Okay, so the server that we have over here is what is allowing us to sort of serve the data back to the user, right? Like we get information from the servers. Okay, so coming down into these groups here, we can see that we have a few things over here, which shouldn't be a lot of problems, right? But we have a server, which is the actual web server that we are trying to work with. Then we have an application server. Then we also have a code base, which is basically where our code resides. Then we also have a database. Okay, so talking back on the web server, we know that the web server is what allows us to get, like, for example, here, what we are doing now is we are connected to the internet and there's a browser that we are using, right? So the contents that we are looking at right now is being served by a web server. Okay, so let's say, for instance, when I went to the search engine and then type something there, I was basically interacting with the web server to get this information that I have now. Okay, so the web server is basically going to be keeping track of everything. So this image that you even see here, I got it from the web server, right? So it is somewhere inside of its code base, right? During the time we were working on the Airbnb, the web static, you saw that we kept some images in some files. So we can assume that this is where we also got that information from, right? There's a lot of things that goes into these kind of things, right? Then we also have the database server, which we know that it's used to store the information about what we need to serve for the user, right? If we are selling something, if you're an e-commerce website, we probably have to keep track of the food we have, the okay, if you know food, like the items that we sell, the prices, and the amount, like the amounts that are left in stock, and a few other details. Right. So the database here is going to be the one keeping track of all of these details, so that we can get the information that we need to work with. Then coming back to the app server, right? So usually there's some background of the app server, right? So these are two different entities. The web server only serves web content, the HTTP and then the HTTPS, right? But then the app server, you can think of them as any application that we can have, right? So again, this application here is not talking about, let's say, the MS Office, browsers, those kind of things. We're talking about applications in this sense. We are talking about it at the OSI layer 4, right? The TCP level in the OSI, layer 7. Okay. Let me not confuse anything, right? So when we're talking about the application, we are talking about the OSI layer 7, right? The HTTP, the SSH, the RDP, like anything that anything at all that can be an application according to this model, right? So we are not really talking about the application in terms of the software, but more of the protocol that is being used instead. Okay, so really, we have the client, the load balancer, which is not always necessary, but its job is to distribute so that when the information we have is too much for just one server to have to host or to handle, it to be given to different server to also help handle that. Okay, so essentially these are some of the things that we just looking at. Here I didn't mention the cloud here, but the cloud here is just basically used to represent the internet. Right? So anything that is over here that we don't really know the full details of, usually this cloud is used to represent that. Okay, so we have the client, which is where we are starting from. We have the servers, and there can be specific types of servers. We have web servers, app servers, database servers, DHCP servers, DNS servers, so many servers, right? So for this thing that we are doing here, we are only interested in the web servers most of the time, and there are a few other things that come into play when we are talking about these topics, right? I don't know if anyone has any question so far based on this, any additions or anything that you would want to clarify. Okay, I guess the absence we would continue. Okay, so you see, the idea here is that we are only trying to figure out how does my data go from my PC all the way to the internet and back, right? So to be able to do that, we need a few tools to work with. Okay, yes. So for example, specific images that are being used, and also I showed some few stuff that you saw just a while back. Okay, so the thing here is that these devices are what we use to sort of explain the thing that we are trying to do. But for now, let's not really worry about these kind of things yet, right? So for now, I'll just get rid of this for the meantime. Right. So here, let's just do something very simple. Let's say that we are trying to access Google, right? So let's just assume that this is your PC. Right. So this is your PC over here. Okay. So you go in there and then you type whatever, maybe www.google.com, right? So somewhere on your network or somewhere you probably might have connected to your phone's hotspot, or you have a Wi-Fi sitting somewhere, or any kind of network that you are using, you are connected to the network in some form or some way. Okay, and let's assume that Google is also sitting somewhere, right? So let's say Google, we usually might use like just to say that we are going over the internet, right? And this is what we use to show what the internet is. Usually when we just don't know or care about the details of the whole thing, right? So usually this is all we see. We send data from our PC, then we get information back from the internet, right? So I send data, I receive, I send, I receive. All right. So essentially, that's all that we are doing. But then there are a lot of things that go inside of these two things that we are talking about over here at this point. There's name resolution. There's a lot of things that goes on, right? So I mentioned that there are many servers. Okay, so but we'll probably make time to talk about that, right? So basically, what happens is that your PC over here is sending data to the internet, and then it also expects that there's going to be a reply, right? So basically, this is what we are doing every time that we are communicating on the internet. We send data, we receive, we send, we receive, we send, we receive, in that order, like constantly doing this. Okay, so this is really what keeps happening every time we are doing that. And though we don't see that physically it's happening, right? And maybe to just make it a little bit easier, what I'll do is I'll bring up a tool called Rorschach, and all that I'll do is I'll just click on this over here, like this. It will show everything that is going on the network at this point, right? So you can see that what this is doing is it's showing me where data is being sent from who, at what time, what kind of data is being sent, things like that, right? So here we can use this to sort of monitor and then analyze traffic as they go by, right? But for now, this is not our focus at this point, right? But this is to just show that the data that we don't see going up and down, we can see it somewhere else, right? And there are other tools that can be used to monitor and analyze information that is going on the network. Okay, so this is like the most simplest one that you can have, right? We have a PC going all the way to the internet, and then the internet responding back to the PC. All right. So even at this point, the video call that we are doing, there's data being sent back and forth. Okay. So when I speak, it has to be transformed into bits and then has to be sent all over the internet, then comes to your ears in that order, right? So everything I'm saying is like traveling light speed to get back, like to get to your side, and like allows you to hear what I'm trying to say. Okay, so now we've seen that we have this information here. We discussed that we have we use this design to relay what is happening on our devices or on our network. Okay, so the concept that we also need to understand is like these tools that we like these devices that we talked about, the clients, the other stuff that they use, right? So these are the devices that we need to know, right? So knowing the devices would help you to actually understand how things are working, right? You need to know what the server is doing, what the database server is and what it does, what the load balancer is doing, and a few other things. Okay. So now let's say talk about what I used to do this. You can actually use something like this to build out like to let's say we have this, right? Like you can use this place here to draw out everything that you want to do, right? You can use this place to do everything, right? To draw everything that you want, work with everything that you need. Okay, that's also possible, right? And then there's also a different place called Canva, right? Where you can use this place to draw or design much more nicer stuff or things of that nature, right? So, and particularly that's what I use for my project, right? So I used Canva to work with this. And also, you'll be needing the icons, right? So like these icons that you see over here, you be need them somewhere, right? So what I use is this place, the flat icon website, right? So for example, you can come in there, you can say, let's say, database server, right? And then we'll be able to get some few information that we can work with. You can see 51,000 stuff. So you can look through this and then pick one that you like better, right? So there are a lot of examples of database icons, like database server icons that you can look at. So when you see things like this more like a database is represented in designs. Okay, so you can choose any one of them that you want that fits the role that is supposed to play. Okay, so anything at all that you need, you can, let's say, come back and then say you want an application server, right? So sometimes you would have to look through a bit to really find out the one that is really cool or really serves the purpose that you actually want. right? So if you want the colored one, that's fine. But basically, this is where I usually get the things, right? But also, it doesn't mean that Canva doesn't give you the things, but most of them can be premium features, but you would have to buy, just so that you don't need to buy them. You can come here, right? Most of the images here are free to be used for anything that you want to use them for. Okay, so this is one place that you can come and then find images for the things that you need to work with. Also, just be careful that the images that you are using allows you to use it in the way that you expect to use them. Right? So let's say if I click on a particular one here, you can see that it says it's free for personal and commercial use with attribution. All right, so just make sure that as you use them, you're using them according to how they or according to the license that they've given you over there. Okay, so that is, let's see, some of the tools that I use. But if you wanted to, you can basically draw out everything in here with your own pen. Like you can see this, that, this goes here, this goes there, right? This is also possible, right? But for visual, like just so that it is visually appealing, you may want to use what maybe Canva, or if you are already good at any other designing software, you can use that. But for things like this, if you know how to use Visual, you can also use Visual to work with that. If you also use Draw.io, that's also fine, right? This site here, Draw.io, right? You can use this place as well. It's also a very good environment to use to draw out stuff, right? So this place, I mean, there are a lot of platforms where you can use to build out or to draw out the things that you need to work with. Okay, so this place is also useful. Looks like it's taking a while, but essentially that's what happens. We have the devices, right? We have the we need to know the devices and the function, right? Okay, and also importantly, we need to know like where to place them. All right, and then how they are connected. Okay, so you can let's say, like, let's just use this three things, right? We need to know the devices and their functions, where to place them, and how they are connected, right? So again, you can basically work with this as well, right? So you can draw the things that you need to, anything that you want to do, you can do, so long as it's able to give you what you want. That's also fine, right? So here I can maybe select something specific, right? I can maybe search for shapes. I can say maybe database, right? And then it gives me some idea about some database stuff that I can work with. Maybe this might not look very maybe cool for you, but then it should be able to like give you some things. Let's say if you want a client, we can search for let's say a client, and then we can see that we have a nice laptop here that we can work with. If you wanted to connect these two together, you can come and choose an arrow, right? So if you want them to communicate together like that, you can basically just come and then just connect them together, right? So something like that. All right. So you can connect these two pieces together just so that, sorry, these two things together, right? And then you see that they are also connected, right? But for now, this wouldn't really make sense to us. So let's go ahead and then try to use this to actually do something that might be more useful to us, right? So we will just do something, and then we would ask questions, and then we'll be out of here. Okay, so before that, any questions on the the devices, any problems so far that you faced with working with your project, or anything that you would like to clarify, or based on what I've said so far. All right, looks like there's nothing to say. So I'll go ahead and then continue that. Okay, so let's say that we are trying to like have a device, or let's say we are trying to have a very simple design where we are just going to have someone go to the internet and back. All right, so it's going to be very okay. So it's going to be an easier something, or let's say a much simpler approach to what we are trying to do. So let's say that we are trying to say something like let's say a network with one user trying to access google.com, right? So this over here could be as complex as needed, but we just want to use it for something very simple. So usually for this kind of thing, we would be sure that we need a device, right? And somewhere or the other, we would also need something somewhere else, which we don't know where it's going to come from. Right? But all that we see is our device, right? Like that's all we see, and everything we know is that this device would have to go through all the way. It's what about this unknown devices? And this unknown device will also have to bring us back information like that, right? Okay, but now what we're going to do is we are going to sort of demystify this line over here and how it's actually going to and fro, right? So let's discuss that. So we have our device, which we understand that it exists. And we've also seen that there are servers that we can work with, right? So we see that we have a web server that we are trying to get information from. So this information that we are trying to get from, we can say is from a web server somewhere. So let's just say that this is going to be from a web server, right? So let's just say something like that. Oops. Hopefully I can draw the globe well. All right. So let's just say this our web server, right? Oops. I can do that. Okay, fine. So we have this over here, our clients on one side, then we have the web server on the other side, right? So let's say this is this server here is hosting something, and it is index.html, right? Something very simple. All right, so index.html, and this index.html, let's say it belongs to a website called www.google.com, or let's say example.com for this example. Okay, so example.com has a website, and we understand that the very first thing that is loaded when we visit the website is the index file, right? The index.html. So this over here is what our client is looking for when we are going to index.html. So our device here has something like this, right? In its search box, let's say it's thinking out loud, and then in its search box, it types www.example.com, right? So we are trying to find a way to go and then find this information, right? Yeah, that's a bad drawing, but anyway. So we want to find a way to send this information from here all the way to the internet, right? But then a lot of things are going to happen when we just type this thing over here. You see, this name, oops, example, all right. So on the internet, we don't really use names, or in networks, we don't really use the name of the thing that we're actually trying to get to. Rephrasing, we actually use numbers, but then like as humans, we tend to remember names better than numbers, right? But actually this name over here would have to be translated into a number, which is known as an IP address. Okay, so first of all, this device here has no idea of what example.com is, and that's the first time. Let's say we got to know that they are having the best deals in web hosting or something like that, and we just want to go there and figure out what their things are all about. So once we do this over here, this guy, this example.com, we don't know what it actually is. So on our devices, we have a configuration that has been done on it, which is known as the DNS server, right? So since we have a DNS server, let's go ahead and then draw something that would mean a DNS server. Okay, so let's say we have a DNS server over here. Okay, and this DNS server, what he does, let me go ahead and then add some information. So DNS server. So what this DNS server does is that it's basically holds some information, right? But it's basically name to name to IP mapping, right? So the example that I can use over here is your contacts list, right? So on your contacts list, when you need to message someone or you need to call someone, you just go to your contacts, you click on the person's name, and then you start texting the person. But then you see that you don't really think about the process in which that happened, right? But usually, or actually what is happening is that you're not testing the person's name, you're actually testing their number, or you're calling that number. But then because it's easier to just find the name of the person rather than to type the number or to look through to find that number that the person has, you rather give it a name so that it's easier to look up. Okay, so if I have Humphrey's number, I rather want to store Humphrey's number so that it's easier to find Humphrey the moment I need Humphrey, rather than to have to search through the numbers and then figure out which one belongs to Humphrey. That's tiring. Someone can have about the same digits that Humphrey has, with just a single number changing. But when I save it with Humphrey's name, it's going to be much more easier to reference and work with it. Okay, so that's the job of this DNS server. It has a name to IP address mapping, right? So this name to IP address mapping basically is just trying to say that I have a name like example.com, but then it has a number, right? So like the example I gave, you have your friend's number, but you usually would save it with their name. So the name part is the name of the person, but when you're actually calling the person, you're not calling the name per se. You're actually calling the number, but the name makes it much more easier. Okay, so when your telecommunication sees the call, they are not calling the person's name. They are calling the number that you are calling, right? That's how it works. Same thing goes out for the DNS server. Okay, so this DNS server over here is in charge of that. And these numbers that we are talking about is what we call the IP addresses. And IP addresses come in two forms. All right, I made a session about that, a session about IP address, and if you want, you can check out the YouTube channel, and you'd see that, right? So the IP address we have here can look something like this, right? We can have an IP address which looks something like 10.10.10.10, right? So this is an example of what we can say is an IP address. Okay, so this IP address could be what we know as example.com, right? So we can say, for example, this is an example. And say example.com is actually having this number, right? Like example.com's number, or let's just use it in terms of phone numbers, right? Let's say example.com number is 10.10.10.10, right? So this could be true for any other kind of phone number that you have, but this over here is an IP address, and the notation you're seeing here is called a dotted decimal notation, and this kind of IP address that you see is what we call the IP version 4. And there's another one called IP version 6, which uses hexadecimal numbers, but we wouldn't tackle that. Okay, so this example.com, we can see that it is over here. It's actually having this number here. Let's say it is 10.10.10.10. So this DNS server is going to keep this information right there. It's going to be small. Okay, I think I would have to draw a bigger. Okay, I can actually extend it. That's nice. Okay, let's extend it a little bit more. Okay, so let's say this one entry, all right? Again, let's say we can have my site.com. And let's say my site.com is 20.20.20.20, right? So this record is also going to be there, right? I don't think any of us here has a single person's digit. Sorry, like only a single person in our contact list. We will have multiple people, and that's exactly what this guy is doing, right? So again, you can have, let's say, blog.com, right? And then let's say blog.com has an IP address of 192.2.10.1, right? So these numbers here are not arbitrary, per se, or okay, these numbers here are made up, but I'm talking about the fact that the numbers you see here are within a specific range. Okay, and any of these 4 numbers can be up to 255. It can't be more than that. Okay, so these numbers here are like an example of what we call IP addresses. So for example here, let's say that we are talking about example.com, right? So when we are going to the internet, this over here, the internet doesn't really use the names. Yeah, just as I was explaining with your telecommunication network, they use the number that you are calling. It's for your convenience that you save it with your name or with the name of the person. So here, the first thing that will happen is that this guy, okay, this your device, the device that you're working with, first of all, it needs to find the IP address of this server, right? And to make it easier, this server over here actually is the one having the IP address of the 10.10.10.10, right? So this IP address over here is for the server that we are trying to get to. Okay, so your PC needs to know this IP address, so it has to contact a DNS server, and the full details of how a DNS server works wouldn't be our discussion for this, right? So let's say that the DNS server knows the details, but sometimes the DNS server that you go to doesn't know the details, so it also has to contact another DNS server, which will also probably contact another one and contact all the way until it finds the information that you need. And this would be a recursive search or a recursive lookup. All right. So for now, let's just assume that the DNS server knows exactly what we are looking for. So what will happen is that it will send the details, like it will send a query to the DNS server and ask, okay, well, I need the number of this person, of this guy called example.com. All right. So this guy will send a query, a DNS query, and then the DNS server will look into its table, right? So think of the DNS server as having a database of all these numbers, or like think of it as a contact list, right? So once it's able to find information, then the DNS server would also reply back to this guy and then say that, okay, well, this over here is at address 10.10.10.10. So now what is going to happen actually is that your PC is either going to send the request to an IP address, not the name that you put over there. Okay, so at this point, your client hasn't yet connected to this this web server yet at all. You've not gotten there yet. So now that you have the number of the person, then you come back and then send your information. So your HTTP request is going to look something like this. You have HTTP requests, right? Which is going to come from your PC, right? So they're going to come from client to the web server, right? And then here the web server will be also hosting it at a particular place, right? And then when you talk about the response to HTTP response, like that is when you have sent the request and you are being responded to. It's going to come back in the reverse form, right? So you can come from the server to the client. Oops, the client, right? So now we know the IP address of this server here. So now we are going to form what we call, let's say, a packet. Okay, so this HTTP request would go in this way, right? So now we know our server's IP address. So let's just create one for the client. Let's say this client here is using 50.50.50.50. Right. For now, you don't worry about these numbers if they're not very, very familiar, but think of them as your phone numbers, right? And then this is how they are shown on the internet, like that. Okay. Again, I have a session on that, so you can look it up. Okay. I think I'll add a link to it in the video as well. So now this is going to look something like this. We have the device is going from 50.50.50 to the address 10.10.10.10, right? So this is what is really happening. I'm calling from 50.50.50.50 to my friend at 10.10.10.10, right? So when he also needs to talk back to me, he has to start from his number back to me. So the response is going to look like this: 10.10.10.10, like that, and going back to whoever asked for the information, right? And one more thing that I would like to mention is that this information here is going to a specific application. This application that is going to is the HTTP server, right? And we know that the HTTP is being served on port 80. So we have something called a socket. So this socket here would look something like this. We have 50.50.50, right? And we are going to place. Okay, so at this point, you probably know what port numbers are, right? So when we are sending information, there's a port number range, which is called the ephemeral or the temporal ports address range, which we can just scoop something from and then use it for our stuff, right? So let's see, for now, this address that we are talking about for us is going to be a general temporal, like random number, very big. There are some that are registered. If you want to know more about that, we can do a quick Google search. So here I'll say the number is 5,000, right? So this number over here, we can assume that it's not being used by a specific service at this point, right? So this is going to be the source, right? So the source is going to be from our PC, right? 50.50.50.50, and our port number is 5,000. So our port number being 5,000 just means that we are coming from, let's say, this kind of session, right? When we were learning about OSI model, we learned about the session layer, which is in charge of setting up and then tearing down connections, as well as the transport layer, which is in charge of these port numbers, right? And also the application layer, of which we have these kind of other things, right? So the source here is from our PC, and the destination at this point is going to be the web server, right? So 10, 10, 10, and get HTTP is being served on port 80. So there's like the full sockets values that we can have. So IP address and the port numbers forms what we call the socket. Okay, so here there's going to be our sockets for the first trip, like the trip going to the server. In the same way, when we are returning, this is going to be about the same way, right? The web server is going to return to us from this port number, right? And the reason why port numbers are important is that they are able to show us which service we are trying to send the information to. Okay, so I'm trying to send information to something on port 80, and port 80 is known or registered for HTTP. Okay, but then from our user side, our PC is not registered for anything, so we can scoop from a range of port numbers that we can use, and this one that is used is used to be able to tell your like tell the server which specific session started that request, right? An example is this, right? For example, I have Canva open, I have this place also open, I also have this open. If I go to another place and I say www.google.com, right, and I start doing this, okay, the web server needs to know who or like which. Okay, let's take it for example like this. The web server needs to know which tab started this session, right? So now I expect that anything I do in this tab should be in this tab. It shouldn't be in the other tab, if that makes sense, right? Like the things I set here should be in this place, not the other one, right? And the reason why this is the case is that the web server is able to know or keep track of multiple sessions from the same PC. Right, you know that you can be opening YouTube at the same time, you can be opening Facebook at the same time, Twitter at the same time, right? So the port numbers are the ways in which the different web servers know that, okay, well, this is the session that asked me for this, and this session asked me for that, so they don't get combined or they don't get confused. Okay, so that's the idea of the port numbers. And this one is, let's say, just an introduction, just so that it's much more easier to work with. But as I showed you earlier, there are some port numbers that we can probably look at. So for now, what I'll do is that I would close this without saving, and this is going to be a lot. But for now, let me just put that for let's say HTTP, right? And probably I might not get HTTP perfect, but just to show something, let me just close this. And let me start. So Google.com, as we know, is not running on HTTP, right? So I'm not getting any information when I'm looking at it from the HTTP level, right? So this one is just to like show you why port numbers are important. So you see, HTTP is on port 80, but then when I try this, I didn't really get anything. Okay, so let's do the same thing, and then try again with HTTPS. So I'll say HTTPS. Oops, sorry. here, what I would have to do is I would have to say TLS. So TLS is what we are used to encrypting our traffic, right? There's also a SSL that we have here, but that is not the case over here. So here, what I'll do is this, right? To make it easier, let's do a quick thing to Google and let's figure out something. So I can say www dot, sorry, I can say ping uh, google.com. Right. Just assume that we are going to get the uh, the so let's google.com is the the IP address that we are getting from Google, and looks like it's very slow. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll just yeah I'll just save it. You can check that later. But in the session on the IP address, I go into this a little bit more. So the idea of the port numbers is to show us who started the session, where they came from, and you're able to stream YouTube. Hello guys, sorry. Had a network challenge. Can you hear me though? Let me confirm. All right. Okay, so I was talking about the fact that the port numbers are in a way what we use to be able to figure out what was used for what, or like who initiated what. Okay, so for now we didn't get into the like the details very much. Okay, so there's like here we see that we go from here to the DNS server to get the information that we need. That's the IP address of the server that we are trying to go to. So now that we have the IP address of the server we have to go to, now our request is actually going to be to the IP address. When I showed you that thing, which was quite a lot, by the way, let me just try to show something at this point. Let me okay, I'll be bringing that up very soon, and then we look at that. Okay, I think my network was a bit slow, but I would bring that up one more time just so that we see how it's happening. Right, and Google has a lot of IP addresses for just one thing. So you see that load balancer that we talked about. So the traffic that you send can be sent to a different server every time that you do that, like to make sure that it's being handled properly. Right. So again, let's come back to this side. And the data that we are going to see is going to be quite a lot, right? But let's do this. All right, so I'll just do a ping to google.com, right? And then here's what I'm seeing. There's the IP address of Google that I'm looking at over here. And over here, we could naively assume that if I copy this IP address and then come to this side and paste it here, all right, I paste in this IP address, you see that it brings me back to Google, right? I pasted the IP address that I found, right? When I did ping google.com, that this IP address that I found. Then I just pasted that IP address inside of the search box, and it brought me to Google, right? So you don't need to actually type google.com. If you know the IP address of Google, you can just type it inside of the search box, and you get to Google. And usually this is faster because it doesn't have to go ahead and then do this name resolution. Because if this guy doesn't know it, he also has to ask someone else. If that person also doesn't know, he also has to ask someone. So think of it as recursion, and that's really what happens. It's called a recursive lookup. So it will keep looking until it finds it. If it doesn't find it, then it will say that it didn't find it. So you see that I just did like this over here, and then it showed me that. Also, there's this command called nslookup. I say nslookup google.com. And you may get the different IP address. Right. Okay. Looks the same way. So here we see the google.com, and then you see the IP address. So this is like an example of how the DNS server would respond. So this DNS server, I'm asking it for google.com. It tells me the IP address is 142, then everything here. This is an example of the IPv6 that I was talking about. It uses hexadecimal, which we wouldn't talk about. But you can see that there's an IP address that I received. Okay. So also you remember that we did something where we did a command called the netstat, right? Where we are able to look at all the things that have been used so far. Okay. So if this session, the Google session is still on, I can be able to figure out where it is. But since it's a number, let's turn off like like the name resolution, and you can see something like this, right? You can see there's the IP address 142. Okay, let me place it down here so that it's easier to look at. You can see that I have this IP address 142.250.100. Sorry, 110.84. Looks like I'm looking at something different. Okay, here it is. All right, so here's the IP address that we had. So 142.250.200.110. Right. So this is the IP address that we are looking at, and we went to port 80, right, which is HTTP. Okay, but there are other things that are still going on over here. And the other thing here that I want you to also look at is this one here. This is the local address, which is my source IP address. So you can see I'm coming from this IP address. Like this my local IP address, and this is the IP address. Sorry, this is the port number that I use to go over there. You can see for every session that I create, there's a specific port number that is like being used, right? And you can see they are usually very huge, right? But for the known port address ranges, they are like known. We know that 443 is for HTTPS and 880 is for that and other things, right? So this one over here was just to show something, right? So let's say, for example, here for the first time when I was going to google.com, right? So let's run the next start one more time. So that thing is no longer there. Okay, here. Okay, you can see that currently we are not sending any more data. So like nothing more is being received. It's the same thing as we saw over here, right? So just about something like that. Okay, so multiple sessions can be sent at the same time. Okay, so let's do something similar one more time. But one more thing I'd like you to see, you can see that there's a similar IP address over here, like looking about the same as this one over here, just looking a little bit different. Okay, so let's do the same thing one more time. I'll close this, and then here I'll set for the IP address, which is equal to this. Okay, so that's going to be our set criteria. Okay, so now I would show this side by side, and then I'll paste the IP address that I just looked at over here, and then press enter. You can see that it just goes ahead and then shows us some information. So let's look at a few things over here. You can see the first time, right? Here, let's look at over here. So this is me sending the information. I'm using port 3750. Hopefully it's large enough for you to see. Like the text is large enough. Can you see it? Okay, so here I'm sending from this port number, which is 37504 to HTTP. Right, there are some connections that happen as we start this, and there's something that we wouldn't talk about much. But you can see that I'm sending it over here, and then again there's another session that I'm also starting again from this next port number to port 80. And then the server, right, the HTTP is now responding to me on this port number. Okay, so again, the HTTP also responds back to the first port number that I gave it, right? So again, multiple sessions can be created at the same time, right? So to you may think that you're just doing something, but then like multiple things could have been started at that same time, right? And these other things that you're seeing here, you don't have to worry about them, right? So another thing I would like to do here is I'll go again, right? I'll go ahead again and then do the same thing in a different tab, right? And then when I press that, let's go all the way to the bottom, right? So now when I press the enter key, you can see that another thing also starts again. All right, same like to the same place, but then I have different source port numbers. So now the result I get here is going to be different from the results I get over here, like in terms of what we are like in terms of the port numbers. Okay, so these are two different sessions, and that's how it's working, right? So, but we would hold on the other things here. This one was just to show the fact that we use port numbers and to explain the sockets and how they are working. Right? So that was just to explain what is happening here. So now there, and also I think one more thing was the fact that we are going to the specific IP addresses. And also maybe you want to see me type that IP address, so maybe you may be thinking that's why we are seeing this IP addresses here. But let's say, for instance, I can basically just close this and then clear this over there, so that you see everything that's going on my system right at this moment. Okay, so you can see that lots of things are going on, like lots of things are going on right here, but we don't know what's happening, right? So these IP addresses are what I'm actually talking to. Like that's what it is. Like my PC is talking to, right? So I can go ahead and then let's see. I'll copy something that I could use for now. Let's just say. Okay, so let me apply this as that. Okay, so here let me copy this IP address, right? And then let's look at something. Right. So in our terminal, we can ask something like who is. Okay, I don't have this, but let's do this. Let's say ns lookup, and I'll paste the IP address over here. La 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 la. Okay, sorry about that. Quick, let me just do actually apt install who is. Right, this who is over here is going to be able to tell us like a few information about the domain name or like some few details. All right, so let's check something here. Let's see who is this over here. Yeah, so it gives us a lot of information. Let's go all the way up. Okay, so I can see that the organization that owns this IP address is Microsoft Corporation, and at this point I'm using Microsoft Teams, so you could probably see where it's coming from, right? So like when you see an IP address, you can basically check who does this IP address belong to, or who is this person, or who is that, like things like that. Okay, so this was just to show what is going on there, right? So the IP address is what we use to work with these things, and maybe just to show something, I can paste this. And also, not every IP address you paste would necessarily take you to one place that you are looking for. Some of these are not really specific, like taking you to somewhere particularly, right? Like they are probably giving you information, but they may not be available to access directly like that, though they are still being accessed. But just the way that they are there doesn't always mean that you can just paste it in there and then work with them like that, right? So that's the idea behind that. So now we can just go ahead and then send our request to the server straight like that, because now we know that right. So we wouldn't have needed to go to the like if we knew this, we wouldn't have gone to the DNS server, because we already know the IP address. So all that we would do is to basically start from here and then go all the way to the server, and the server can reply back to us if it has what we asked it for, right? So that is what is happening, right? So if we don't know the IP address of the server, then you would go ahead and then ask the DNS server for the information. It will return it to us. Then we would use the IP address that it returns us to access the information that we want to access. And that's how data goes back and forth on the internet with IP addresses, similar to your phone number in your contact list. Okay, so that was also explain how this particular thing is going on, right? The other forms of information is just how you would place those, like how you place those information, right? So this web server over here is not acting on its own. This index.html, right, is being served somewhere else. It's sorry, not served. It's contained somewhere else. Right. So let's say it's contained in a folder where we also have, let's say, we can have HTML. You can also have styles.css. You can also have, let's say, script.js. You can even have many things, right? Like this is going to be where all our code is stored, right? Like most of our code, right? And then for this web server to do this, it has to communicate with this code base so that it would get the information so that it can be able to serve it to the user, right? So the user asks for the information, the web server looks into its code base, figures out what to return, and then takes it back to the user, like that. So this back and forth keeps on happening for everything that the user wants. If the user that doesn't request something that the server has, the server will tell them that, okay, well, I don't have this information, and we've seen this thing before, error 404, when there's nothing available for us to have. Right. So let's say I try to go to google.com, right? google.com/alx let's say /alx. Let's just look at that, right? So we are doing google.com/alx. You can see that this is not a valid thing to Google, right? Google doesn't know this, so it will tell you that was an error, right? But if it was something that Google knew, it will just go ahead and then give it to you. Let's say Google knows about Chrome, so you should be able to take us to Chrome, hopefully. It's taking a while. Okay. It's taking a while. Okay. That took a while, but then you can see that it's took us to where we needed to go. Okay, so again, this project is really not about all the specifics, but your ability to basically understand the bigger picture of how things are sent back and forth in the on the internet. Okay, so like I said, we can have this web server if you take the information from the code base, wherever it is, right? So it takes it and then just serves it on the like return it back to the user. Okay, so that is what is happening when we do that. And also because this information here has to be stored somewhere, like your username and your many things, like those information has to be stored somewhere. We need a server, which is called the database server, which is able to store stuff. Right. So let's say we have this database. Yeah, that's my database. Okay. Then this one over here, what is in charge of storing this information, right? So the design could be simple, whereby this single server can contain the web server, the SQL server, everything, right? Also, we can have like delegated responsibilities, whereby each server has a specific role that it is performing. So this over here is our DNS server, sorry, database server. Right. So anything that happens to need to take information, the web server will come and then get it from the like the information from the users that this user access. It should check the database and check whether it's still available, and then return the information, whether it's a yes or no, something like that, right? But then usually what happens is that we have this other device which is very dedicated for taking in information and then processing it based on whatever thing that is supposed to do. Right. So this guy here is called the application server, and let's talk a bit about that. So the application server is more of like the server that is able to host multiple applications. So we can have the web server communicate with this back and forth, right? So instead of communicating directly to the database, the web server would rather communicate to this application server, and from there, the application server will now send a request to the database so that the database will work on the information and then back to the application server. Then the application server will give it back um, delegated information, or like dedicated form of responsibilities. Okay, so this app server over here, we normally see that it takes the information and then processes it in terms of business logic. Business logic, like based on what you are trying to do, what is an accepted way of doing it, right? It can be more than that, but let's stick with it for now. But basically, what it's doing is that it takes the information and then checks how it's supposed to be like used, right? So let's say you see the time that we're building the console. You see, so if you needed to, or let's just say like the first part, we were working with the clone, the Airbnb clone. We see that we created models that needed to be created and things like that. So let's say that the user is trying to create a model. So it gets to the web server. The web server says, okay, well, this is a request that the user is trying to do. So the web server doesn't handle that by itself. So the web server is only interested in rendering the visual thing that we see on the website, right? So for that reason, it will send the data, like the request that it got, to the app server or the application server. So this guy, he's going to be in charge of creating the things, making sure that, or like processing the logic to see whether it can do it, right? And you also understand, like, remember that with the console that we built right after we're done, we save the information to a file storage, which we can also use a database to store the information, right? So the app server here is, let's say, think of it as where we process the information. Think of it maybe like the console that we created. It's used more or less handle those processing, right? And if it needs to save it, it saves it to the database. If it needs to load anything, it loads it from the database as well, right? So these guys communicate as well. So this like more of a more simplistic example of how we may work with these things, right? So if there are thousands of users accessing the same site, it can become very like very hard to keep up, right? So that's why we will need multiple servers to handle the load, right? And then when we have multiple servers, they are configured the same way, and that's why we need their load balancer, right? So the load balancer will take care of taking the information that is going to come in, then turn it to the specific server based on a specific way of working with the information, like maybe for the server, you handle every connection coming from Ghana. For the second server, you handle connections coming from Nigeria, right? You handle, so this is going to be reasonable if we know that our customers are coming from particular places, right? Which would make sense. Or we can say that, well, this server is going to, or like, let's say we have two servers. So for the first request, the first server will handle it. The second request, the second server will handle it. The third, the first will handle the fourth. So in that fashion, right? So you may want to look up the different algorithms that is used when we are load balancing. Okay, but essentially, this is really how the thing is going. The rest of the other things are like understanding when you have to scale up. And by scaling up is when we know when to add more devices or scale down, which is to need less devices. Okay, so to end it up, what would happen is I would like show, let's see, a realistic example of what I have done, and then maybe use that also as an example to finish up the things, and then we can ask questions and end the session. So again, as I was saying, I use Canva to do the task. So again, I also got my images mostly from this flight icon site, because Canva wasn't always free. So for example, here, this is one of the tasks that we are supposed to work on, right? So the information here you are seeing doesn't have to be crazy. It's about the same thing that you saw. Just that this one has a few moving parts, right? But here's the thing: there's always a client. He's trying to access something. The measures in which he uses to get to the site, whatever is at that site, the mechanisms they use over there, that doesn't concern us, right? But here, what we are doing is that we are now at the point where it concerns us. Like, we have to determine how they access the information, or how they will access the information, right? So if there are any other thing, like here, we don't have firewalls, we don't have security going on or anything like that, right? So once you understand the basics of how these things are supposed to work, then you can go ahead to put those other miscellaneous devices, right? But essentially, this is how the thing is. But those other devices, like this one over here, the SSL, that's what gives us the ability to work with. Okay, rather let me use this one. I think my network has really begun to go very slow. Not sure why. Okay, so we would use this to sort of work around this, and then we can go ahead to finish up. Right, so is the same thing, right? We have a user starting something, then they basically ask for the, like, they're going to the foobar.com, right? So think of it again as the example.com. So now when it types that, it has to go to the DNS server so that it would get the information. And again, the DNS server, as I showed over here, has some information. And when it gets it, it has to be able to figure it out and then return the answer or the IP address. So that's what we are doing over here. I just have a little table here, which is basically showing a few things with the DNS records. So you may want to look up how the DNS records are made, right? So that's with that one. So it's asks for the DNS server. Like, it asks the DNS server for the IP address of the foobar.com, and then it will respond with a IP address, right, which is in this case 8888, right? Then from here, we're not going to send the requests using the IP address that we got, right? So this over here is just to provide security with this the 443, that like the port 443 or the HTTPS that we use. Now, this guy over here, which you've seen before, the load balancer, is going to take care of sending the data to specific server groups. Like maybe for the first time, it will send it to this server, the next one to send it to this server, the next to send to this server, depending on some method that we want to use with that. And these guys over here, this web, these guys with that looks like a wall with a fire over there, right? Basically, they are called firewalls, right? So they are in charge of making sure that the data that you are bringing into the network is safe. Okay, it's safe before it gets into the network. It's able to check for multiple things, whether the IP addresses are allowed, is it going to the right place, does it have funny information inside of it, do we even allow traffic from this part of the world, like things like that. It's like the person who is there to make sure whether the things that we are actually trying to access is accessible to us, right? And then these things are things that we've seen: the web server, the app server, the database, then the code base, right? These are things we've seen. And then the monitoring guys over here are to check, is my server in good health? Do I need to replace anything? Is it being attacked? Is it okay? Like things like that, right? Like who is accessing things? What are they accessing? Like, and from here, I think you could even be able to search for or like know what people are really searching for on your website. And then I think maybe that could even inform your decisions on how to make better decisions. But for this one over here, we are more interested about the health and the security of the servers that we are working with. Okay, so that is like an example of how things are working. It's still the same design, but just that maybe it has a few other moving parts that come into play. So we have the user one more time going all the way to foodbar.com. Then there are like information with the DNS server, which I've placed a few things over here. Right. So this is really what is happening when we are talking about the infrastructure, right? It's similar to drawing a flow chart of how things are supposed to go. But then areas, this is how we show the information, right? So you can either use Canva or you can use the TL Draw. Anything that makes it okay for you, that's fine, right? So we could also drawn it like this and it would be fine, but this is much more appealing to my eyes. So that is why I use this one over here. So we can go ahead and then ask any questions we have, and then we'll be out of here. Any questions? Does anyone have any question? All right. Okay. So in the absence of questions, I hope this session has been informative, and thanks for joining.